All right, so we are at 11:03. I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Let's go and get started. We have a lot of wine to talk about and taste today. Before we start, just want to thank the New York Wine Grape Foundation for asking me to host today's session about sparkling wines. I don't know about you guys, but this series of virtual tastings has really taken the edge off of not being able to do these sorts of things in person. Although I'm sure I'm like you guys, I sure do miss them. I know many of you already. I'm looking at the list and I see a lot of familiar names. I know at least most of you in passing via social media or elsewhere. But just in case you don't know me, I'm Len Thompson, and I've been writing about, I'm a Long Island-based wine writer and wannabe podcaster. I've been writing about New York wines for the better part of 2 decades now. And now that I'm almost 20 years into taking New York wine seriously, some might suggest too seriously, I'm more convinced than ever that the diversity of grapes and wines being made is really what makes this industry one that's exciting and one that matters. It's important to, this is my own little personal thing. New York wine isn't just Riesling or Cabernet Franc or Merlot or Chardonnay. It's not any single grape. The fact that the state's able to grow so many different grapes, like I can't think of another state or region that grows as many different grapes. It's a great thing. And so we're talking about sparkling wines today. There's a long history of sparkling wine in New York State, which you'll hear a little bit about today from some of our panelists. Production is still on the rise, so it's an important part of New York's wine past, present, and future. And we have quite an array and styles of wines represented today, so this should be fun. Before I introduce our panelists, just some housekeeping items and some ground rules from yours truly. First, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box right in Zoom. And please ask questions. I've joined a lot of these sessions during the pandemic, both wine and otherwise, both as a host and as an attendee. And these are always better when it's a conversation rather than a lecture. And if you could help us out by putting your questions in the Q&A, that will help us keep track of them so we can make sure we get through as many as we can. And if there are any that we don't get to for some reason, we can capture those and I'll have the winemakers follow up with you after the fact. Second, I've also encouraged our presenters to ask you questions. So, and if they do ask you questions, you can feel free to respond to them in the chat rather than the Q&A. So ask questions in the Q&A, answer them in the chat. And the last thing for me is actually just a repeat from the first one. Please ask questions. I know you guys aren't just here for the samples. You guys are all respected folks in the trade and media. You could have gotten the samples without the seminar. You're here because you want to learn. There's a lot of sparkling wine knowledge on this panel today, so take advantage of it. I think that's it for me, and I know you didn't sign up to hear me talk, so let's get to our panelists. Today we are joined by Bruce Tripp, winemaker at Milea Estate Vineyard in the Hudson Valley. Patrick Doyle is joining us from Pleasant Valley Wine Company. Steve DiFrancesco is the winemaker at Glenora Wine Cellars. He's here with us as well. From Dr. Frank, on Keuka Lake, we actually have General Manager Megan Frank and sparkling winemaker Eric Bauman. And last but not least, we do have Thomas Spatek from the Lenz Winery here on the North Fork of Long Island. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we also have 3 polls that I'm going to be popping up today during the session just to make sure you're all paying attention, including this first one, which is fairly straightforward. How many New York sparkling wines have you had before today? So we'll give everyone a few seconds to do that. In the meantime, I'm going to invite Bruce to kick us off with the Milea 2017 Proceedo Sparkling Rosé, which he makes using grapes that you might not necessarily think of for sparkling. But before he dives into that, I'm going to ask everyone the same question. Fair warning, everybody. When you're not drinking your own sparkling wine, what sparkling wine are you typically drinking?
Well, typically I'll choose a New York wine. Several of the producers that are on the panel here, I've had several of them and enjoyed them very much. But our home AVA, Towsey, produces a nice sparkler as well.
Absolutely. And
that's typically the one that I would go if I'm not having some of our own sparkling wine.
All right, that's awesome. Thanks, Bruce. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Milea, which we have a lot of long time sparkling wine producers on this tasting. Your winery is still pretty new, so why don't you just tell everyone a little bit about what you're doing, and then tell us a little bit about this wine in particular.
Well, first, I just want to thank New York Wine and Grape for putting this on, and you, Len, for hosting us, and thank you to all the other panelists. Milea, We formed the company in 2015. Our first crush was in 2015. It was even today's production is modest compared to some of the other panelists. We're doing about 2,000 cases a year now, with plans to go up a little bit more than that over the next couple of years. So we just opened our tasting room less than a year ago. It's been a great success. There seems to be a lot of buzz locally with people coming out, even during COVID, and enjoying our wines. It's been quite a pleasure. Our vineyard, most of our vineyard is very young. At the tasting room, we have about 11 acres of grapes, quite a mixed bag of things, you know, Cab Franc, Riesling, of course. We also grown some Blanc, some Chardonnay, and some Gruner. And we're really kind of excited as these are going to be coming into fruit probably next fall. And with mainly our Cab Franc, which is at the top of the hill. So we're quite excited about that going forward. So Milea, basically, it was formed by, there's 3 partners in Milea. There's Barry Milea, Ed Evans, and myself as being the principal owners of the winery. Like I said, we started in 2015, so things are really kind of, we're still kind of young in the business. And I feel like that we're getting a warm reception from, you know, the local people and coming out and tasting our wines.
Yeah, that's great, Bruce. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Proceedo?
Well,
You know,
Proceedo, we actually,
it's definitely made with some interesting grapes that you don't normally associate with sparkling wine. So we'd love to hear more about that.
Well, the Proceedo Rosé, it basically, this is, it's a forced carbonation process. So, and the idea was to have it be just a light sparkle to it, sort of on the lines of a Frisant. And really what we're looking for here is to just enhance the Rosé so that, you know, as a summer sipping wine, kind of like, you know, I like to say I like to, you know, after a long day out on the vineyard, to sit back and as the sun's setting, kind of have a glass of Proceedo Rosé to just take the edge off the day. And it's quite a pleasant, you know, sip. What's nice about this wine is it retains quite a bit of the fruit that you would expect from a rosé wine. It's a dry wine, and it's got that nice sparkle to give it just a little freshness to linger through the taste. We use, in this wine, I used quite a myriad of mainly Bordeaux varieties. There's a little bit of there's probably the most of anything is the Merlot that's in it. We also have some Cab Sauv in it. There's some Cab Franc in it. We also have a little Blanc Frankish in there, which is kind of an oddball in this, but I think it works. And basically what's happening is we're pulling a little bit of juice off of each of our red production. You know, when we're in a cold soak is when we pull that juice off for our rosé wines, but also for the rosé, the Proceedo Rosé. Sort of well, yeah. And like I said, the key thing with this wine is that we're trying to just elevate the rosé experience with a little bit of the freshness from the bubbles.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm looking to see if there's any questions. I don't see any coming in at the moment. So I'm going to ask you the second of the questions I'm going to ask everybody. So what is your ideal way to enjoy this wine?
Well, as I started saying earlier, I love to sit back, hot summer day. I've been sitting on the tractor working. Maybe I've been out in the field pulling weeds, and it's pouring a glass of this and just kicking back and just say, yeah, this is what it's all about.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you very much, Bruce. I just see one question. Hi, Bruce. Amy, thank you for asking a question. Hi, Bruce. Thanks for sharing this. Are you buying your Merlot? And did you make the still wine for this with the sparkling in mind? Or is this also the blend for your still rosé?
That's a good question. Well, the grapes actually come from several locations, at both extremes of the state. We did get the Merlot actually came from the Merlot and the Blanc Frankish came from out in Fredonia, AA vineyards. And we also got, the Cab Sauv, and the Cab Franc came from down in Long Island. Two growers down there, Anthony Sanino, we got the Cab Sauv from, and Joe Riley, we got the Cab Franc from. And generally speaking, this is the base for our rosé wines. So our standard rosé is the same mix, with the exception that, and then I blend a little bit of Vidal in there just to lighten the color, because sometimes I get a little, the extract is quite well. So I wanted to lighten that in this particular version with a little bit of Vidal. That also came from the western part of the state, from Dennis Rack.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. I think that's it. So I think we can go ahead and move on. You're off the hook, sir. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to go to Patrick from Pleasant Valley, which again is a wine that you might not, a wine made from grapes that you might not necessarily think of for sparkling. But Patrick, before we dive in, I'm going to ask you as well, when you're not drinking your own, what sparkling wine will most often find its way into your glass?
Good morning, Len. Thank you. Thanks to the Wine and Grape Foundation. And I'm not making this up. When I drink sparkling wine, it's typically from New York, and it's typically Glenora or Dr. Frank.
Well, that worked out well, didn't it? Great. Thank you very much. So, it's impossible to have a sparkling wine conversation in New York, especially one that you're a part of, without talking about the history of Pleasant Valley. So can you just give, I believe Pleasant Valley goes back to the mid 1800s. So if you could just give us a little bit of information about that, and then tell us a little bit about this wine.
Sure. So Pleasant Valley started in 1860, and it was, with hybrid grapes originally. And then in the early 1870s, we got into sparkling wines and started making champagne, and our champagnes won a number of awards in some prestigious European competitions in the late 1800s. Going into the early 1900s, pre-Prohibition, things were going very strong. Our champagne was one of the top champagnes in the country. And then we made it through Prohibition as U.S. bonded winery #1. There's a long sordid story of corporate ownerships and changes, but Gold Seal became a part of our operation. And in 1995, my dad, after the brands had been sold and the winery was about to close due to a bunch of corporate changes, my dad bought the brand back and ultimately the real estate back. And we've just been trying to keep it going for the last 25 years. So, we are very proud of the heritage, and it's a big, old, expansive place, and it's a tough place to keep going, but we're just moving right along.
That's great. And then, so this wine is a blend of Céval, Cayuga, and Aurore. Is that right?
That's right. So the Gold Seal Blanc de Blanc is a champagne that, a number of years ago, Steve would know better than me, but was the sort of top Gold Seal champagne. We brought it back just a couple years ago. It has traditionally been, either mostly Chardonnay or some blend of hybrids. And for this particular blend, we used Cayuga, Seyval, and Aurore, which are sort of classic hybrid grapes for our champagnes. This is a really good anytime champagne. It was blended by Beth Witt, who was our winemaker. She has since left us, but we're pretty happy with it.
Great. And there's a couple of questions that have come in, so we can go ahead and ask those. I love hearing about the incredible history at PV, Patrick. Thanks for that. Question: how committed are you to hybrids, and what do you think they bring to the sparkling category? And what is your favorite hybrid for sparkling?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we try to do what we've been doing historically as well as we can. I know that there's a little bit of back and forth about it, but Len, I think, as you said, the state is a big state. There's a lot of different stuff going on here, and we have had a long tradition of using hybrids for our sparklers, and there isn't any reason to mess with that as far as we're concerned.
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
That's right.
All right, a couple more questions for you. Actually, a bunch of them are coming in, so this is good.
Oh, no.
Can you please discuss where the fruit is sourced from and why you use the New York State appellation as opposed to a more region-specific AVA?
The fruit comes from our vineyards that either my dad or my brother owns in the Finger Lakes. I think we acquire some grapes from outside of the Finger Lakes, but that may be the reason why we use the New York State appellation. But it's most of our grapes come from the Finger Lakes.
All right. And the next one, and this is one that you and I emailed about this week. You use the word champagne. What are your thoughts about the use of that word outside of the Champagne region and the movement of folks pulling away from that?
Well, again, historically, when the French were trying to expand the concept of champagne in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were encouraging us to use it. And there's a treaty that occurred in 2006, which they say essentially grandparented in those champagnes that were called champagnes up until that point. So we have a number of labels here that are well established before 2006, and we continue that. It's a little dicey, but given our history and given the 100 and some odd million years that we've been making champagnes, we feel pretty confident that it's still a good use of the term. Thanks.
And the last one I see, here's just a quick one. Can you sell your wine in Europe?
I imagine we can. I don't think we're doing too much of that right now.
All right, one more, and then I think we'll probably move on. I know some Finger Lakes vineyards like Standing Stone were initially established to be Gold Seal for sparkling. Is there any collaboration with vineyards like these today?
Well, we're not. Standing Stone does terrific work, and we're not essentially collaborating with them. But my dad, right before he left the business in the late 80s, acquired all of Taylor and Great Western and Gold Seal's vineyards, and that included some of the original Fournier acreage on the east side of Seneca Lake, which my brother now owns. So yeah, there's a lot of history, and Standing Stone has a part of that. So, and we have tremendous respect for their work. They do great work there.
Great, thanks. And actually, one more question, just because I like seeing all the questions about hybrids. Can you talk a little bit more about your use of hybrid grapes? What led you to planting them, and how many of your wines do you use them in?
Well, I don't know. I think we use hybrids in probably 75% of our wines. And again, I think it's just because it's the tradition that is Pleasant Valley. You know, it's just part of what, and other amazing younger winemakers are building on that and taking it a different direction. But we really feel like that's an important part of our history that we need to preserve and improve on, honestly.
Perfect. Yeah. So before I let you go, Patrick, what is your favorite way to enjoy this particular wine that you guys produce?
That's a tough question for me, Len. I think this is a great anytime champagne. I mean, it dresses up, it dresses down. It really just depends on the occasion, and we just we're pretty proud of how it came out.
Great, thank you very much, sir. You are also now off the hook, and we're going to move on. First, I'm going to launch our second poll, which is what styles of sparkling wine do you prefer? Just want to give everyone a chance to give us a little feedback and see what they like. And while that's going, Steve's up next with his Glenora Brut, which is always one of my personal favorites. It's your turn on the hot seat.
Okay.
When you're not drinking your own sparkling wine, and I hope you'll tell us a little bit about your program here in a minute. What kind of sparkling wine do you usually find yourself drinking?
Well, I'm always impressed with Gloria Ferrer. They do great. Everything they make, and the prices are amazing. Roederer Estate is another one, but many of our neighbors, I would mention many of the Finger Lakes wineries, except I'd leave people out, so I don't want to do that. But I'm excited about the Gold Seal brand coming back. I cut my teeth on Gold Seal sparkling wines with Guy DeVoe, who went on to start Mum Napa Valley. And DVX sparkling wine and at Mum is named after him. And I'm told that if you take a tour of Mum, they forget to tell you that Guy was in the Finger Lakes for 25 years. But anyway, they act like he went from Epernay right to the
Right.
Anyway, it's really exciting for me to see the work that Pat and his family are doing, bringing back that Gold Seal brand. Chateau, well, it was Chateau Franc for a while, but Dr. Frank has some really great sparkling wines. Sparkling Point, they're not part of this panel, but they do too. And I know Lenz, when Eric was there, did great stuff. And I have a lot of confidence that Thomas is going to continue that, or is. I just haven't had a chance to try them yet. So, Bruce, I haven't gotten to try your stuff. My son actually has a cidery down near you, and he released his first pet net this past month, made with grapes. So,
sparkling wine runs in the family, then, Steve.
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting to see this happen, and then my grandson too, perhaps. So
there you go.
So not only the Franks and the Doyles, but the DeFrancescos.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah. So thanks for that, Steve. So you have a pretty diverse sparkling wine background and program at Glenora. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then we can talk about this wine in particular.
Okay. So in with the 87 vintage, we had an ambitious idea to really put an emphasis on sparkling wines here at Glenora. And I think the 82 vintage was our first, but with 87, we really ramped it up. And in fact, the 88 Blanc de Blanc won big in San Francisco in 1991. That was kind of a good recognition for New York wines at the time, for Finger Lakes wines, because at that point, the writers thought we only made Lake Niagara and things like that. But anyway, there's nothing wrong with any of those grapes. Hybrids are really nice, and natives and vinifers, but our classic method, Méthode Traditionnelle products are made with, we have a Brut and a Blanc de Blanc. The Brut that you're trying is 76% Pinot Noir and 24% Chardonnay. And we like to, we source grapes from Seneca, Cayuga, and Keuka lakes. And sometimes the west side of the lake, which is supposedly the cooler side because it gets the morning sun, not the afternoon sun. But sometimes that's more appropriate for sparkling in a hot year. We've had plenty of hot years lately. So actually this one is from the west side of Seneca, west side of Cayuga, and Rieslings also can do better in a little bit cooler sites in a hot year. So we like to be able to have components that we can work with and blend as we need. And this has been in tirage since 2014, so it's been 6 years on the yeasts, and we disgorge 4 times a year typically, and don't like to leave it on on the cork all that long because it starts developing at that point. So we like to have some extended yeast contact. Then we also make transfer method sparkling with the help of Pleasant Valley. We take our wine over there and use the transfer method, and we're using Cayuga White. We also are playing around with encapsulated yeasts, and we just released a Cayuga with a Teinturier variety as a dosage, which makes it a nice pink color. So that's been kind of cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, you talking about making some wine with Pleasant Valley leads us to one of the questions we just got. So that's a good segue that you didn't even know about. I'm fascinated by quality tank method sparkling. So as a bit of a leading question, I'd love to hear from each producer if they think there's any room due to varieties, style, or anything else for quality Charmat in any part of New York. And Steve, you can answer first, but I'd invite anyone else to come off of mute if they have an opinion as well. Well,
I think that there's no reason a tank fermented sparkling wine can't be very good. It just is not that easy to get 7 years of yeast contact in the tank. But there's no reason it can't be just as good as anything else, with maybe a possible exception of the bubble quality. But that is a matter of technique and knowing what you're doing. But there are some really good Charmat products out there from Michigan, for example. They make some really good ones up there, and Swedish Hill does. And Pat's products are bottle fermented but finished in tanks, and they can come out really good. And you can actually blend tirage, different tirage together when you do it that way. And amazingly, the Ballatore products and the Barefoot Bubblies, when I've tasted those, they might be sweet and not my style, but technically they're pretty well made, and I have no doubt that they're tank fermented.
Sure, of course. Anybody else want to chime in on Charmat method stuff? Thomas, Megan, Eric. All right, we can. Let's see. Oh, hold on. Two other questions for you, Steve.
Okay.
Glenora often does the Dosage Your Own sparkling event, which is a cool way for people to learn about bubblies.
Yep.
Is that happening again this year? And are there any digital plans for educating about this process if you can't do it live in person?
Well, we're going to do one day this week or this year instead of 2. We do it the second weekend of December, and people usually sign up the year before or after they've done it. And we will set up different dosage levels in the same wine and let them taste them, and they decide which level of sweetness they would like. And then they come down to the cellar and they get to disgorge their own bottles and dosage them the way they like them. And it's been really popular. It's been going on for at least 30 years now.
Yeah, that sounds like a really, really cool event. One last question for you, Steve. And then there's one, it's more of a high level question that I'd like to ask everybody. Steve, is the Chardonnay barrel aged at all when it's a still wine for this particular?
Sometimes we do. And in fact, this one isn't, but the 2017 Blanc de Blanc actually has a couple of components that were barrel fermented, and they were barrel fermented Pinot Blanc actually. That are blended in. So our Blanc de Blanc is, our current release is 100% Chardonnay, but we've got some tirage coming up that'll be released in the next couple of years. They're going to have some Pinot Blanc in them, and even a touch of Pinot Gris after being in Franciacorta 2 years ago. It got me interested in Pinot Grigio a little bit.
Great, great. So this is another question, Steve, it isn't just for you. So I'd invite our other panelists to chime in. Kate, this is a great question. With all of these, I'm always curious about holiday pairings, a classic option and a weird option. People always love hearing about some oddball or non-fancy pairings, like popcorn with sparkling wine. What are some other examples of some of your favorite holiday pairings?
Well, like Patrick, I think it's good with anything except maybe candy corn and kale. No, just kidding.
There's nothing good with candy corn.
That was a Bartles and James commercial.
Oh, it was.
From the 70s, from the 80s, before most of you guys were able to drink in the 80s. Anyway, I like sparkling wine with anything, literally. Kentucky Fried Chicken. Not just kidding. But sparkling goes with anything. And I'm not great talking about wine and food pairings because I like to eat and I like to drink wine. So everything tastes good to me. I mean, there's some things that don't, but obviously, but I can almost enjoy anything, any wine and any food. Sorry, that wasn't a very.
No, it's all good, Steve. Does anybody else have an interesting or perhaps oddball sparkling wine pairing that they want to share?
Yeah. Eric has something.
Yeah, I typically make a candied bacon, and it typically goes with all my dried wines or Dr. Frank's dried wines. So Blanc de Blanc, Blanc de Noir usually goes really well with a spicy and sweet candied bacon. So it's just a little odd, but I share it with all my family at Thanksgiving as well as Christmas time. So it's my holiday treat.
That sounds pretty good. That's pretty good to me. I'm pretty sure candied bacon goes with anything, though.
Yeah, pretty much.
Anybody else? All right. I guess thank you very much. Oh, actually, hold on, Steve. Before I let you go, what is your favorite way to enjoy this particular wine?
Well, like I said, at any time by itself with food, before we eat. Nice thing about being known for sparkling wine is that when we're doing a tasting, we lead off with a glass of sparkling wine, and it usually puts everybody in a good mood. So it's kind of helpful. And there's so many nice wines being made in the Finger Lakes, and everybody's got dry Rieslings and Cab Francs. But when you bring a sparkling, it sets you apart a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks very much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So now we're going to move on to the Dr. Constantine Frank 2016 Blanc de Noir. We have both Megan Frank and Eric Baumann with us today. So before we dive into the wine, which I'm pretty curious about because it's 75% Pinot Meunier, which is pretty rare. Megan, you want to tell us, can you, hold on, again, I made a mistake again. When you're not drinking your own wines, what sparkling wines are you drinking? So there's two of you there, so we expect two different answers, please.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here with all of you. I definitely don't discriminate when it comes to, choosing a wine to try. I'm a big fan of, traditional method sparklings from around the world. So like Franciacorta, I was lucky to go to Lombardy last summer, and that was really amazing. Cava, the Corpinat producers, the quality producers there doing amazing things. But I have a really soft spot for Tasmanian sparklings and sparklings from Australia. They're doing some really impressive things on there as well. So lots of cool things to try.
And my soft spot would be English wines, kind of where this 2016 Blanc de Noir lends itself some assemblage, or the blending of it was because I was drinking some English wines previous to this, Nye Timber being one of them. And then where this wine kind of comes into play was a producer, Ridgeview Vineyards, which is adjacent to Nye Timber. So first drinking Nye Timber and then feeling out Ridgeview, where they play with a little bit more Pinot Meunier fractions, as well as some others. But if I stay domestic, I would say Gruet, a lot of New Mexico sparkling wine. Their price point seems to be reasonable and fairly good quality. As well as, like everyone else on this panel, Finger Lakes sparkling wines. I always like to get out there and try what other people are doing.
Great, thanks guys. So Megan, I know that there's a long history of sparkling wine at Dr. Frank, so maybe you can just tell us a little bit about that, and then we can hand it over to Eric to talk about this wine.
Sure. Yeah, so our kind of sparkling history goes back to 1985. But my great-grandfather started our winery back in 1962. He was a Ukrainian immigrant, a World War II refugee, and came here not speaking a word of English, had a really difficult time starting out, but he did have a PhD in viticulture. So armed with that, he kind of created a whole new life for our family and started our winery on the western side of Cuvee Lake, and was the first person to successfully plant the European grape varieties, Vitis vinifera, here in the eastern United States. But Constantine really didn't like sparkling wine. He sort of poo-pooed it. He would say that the only reason the French make champagne is because they can't make a decent table wine that far north. So not the best.
That's great.
I'm sure he got into a lot of fights with producers of champagne for that. But his son felt the opposite. So his son was Willie Frank, who's my grandfather. Eric knew Willie very well as well. And Willie was really bullish on traditional method sparkling wines, utilizing Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier, and we also do Riesling sparkling. So he purchased this property where we're sitting now, our deep stone cellars, where we host some food and wine experiences, but also all the sparkling production is here, just adjacent to our main winery. And really saw the potential. And to Pat's point, he actually labeled every bottle said Finger Lake Champagne up until his passing in 2006, where we now label the wines Messe Champenois. So very much a pioneer of traditional method sparkling. And this year we're celebrating our 35th anniversary. And, my aunt has played a great hand in that as well, with working with producers in Champagne and also out in Sonoma and Napa. So it's great to have this kind of quality focus. And Eric joined us 14 years ago. 15 years ago, when my grandfather was looking to kind of step back and retire. I met Eric, who has a background in sparkling winemaking in California. And it's so rare to have that background. It's so specialized. And that same year, I believe, Willie passed on, unfortunately. So Eric has continued on, the production with the sparkling wines, and we're doing lots of really interesting and fun things, to come. We still make, the Blanc de Noir, Blanc de Blanc, the Brut Rosé. We make sparkling, 2 different styles of sparkling Riesling, some, really fun rosés as well. So I'll pass it over to Eric. We call him Mr. Bubbles around here, so everyone's welcome to call him that too, I guess. Hopefully that's okay. And we have the Blanc de Noir, so take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. We can get right into the 2016 Blanc de Noir. I know Len had mentioned he was surprised with the 75% Pinot Meunier fraction. We typically here, like Megan said, 15 years being here, our vineyards are kind of right outside this stone building. Out front is a Chateau vineyard, and it's about 16 acres of vineyards there with a lot of different grape varieties, but majority Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. And that's where I source all of the Chateau or the Dr. Frank sparkling now, but it's our Chateau Frank vineyard. So the Pinot Noir, the Pinot Meunier, and the Chardonnay typically is what I'm looking for. My Blanc de Blanc, my Blanc de Noir, and whatever portion is kind of left of there, we'll use in the other programs, even the Brut, obviously, but wherever it may fit into the blend, depending on the yields we get. And that Pinot Meunier sits probably halfway down the vineyard in between a Pinot Noir vineyard and a Chardonnay vineyard. Yields are, we don't have a lot of Pinot Meunier. In the years previous, when I first started here, a lot of the Pinot Meunier production was typically just pressed and used for our Rosé program, almost as a saignée, soaked, cold soaked, and then I would bleed the juice from that and then press, and it would be my free run and my pressed juice. But typically I would use the free run for the Rosé, for that Pinot Meunier. Yields have kind of went, you know, back and forth year to year, depending on the year. This grape variety really sees, especially the Pinot Noir and the Chateau Vineyard, they both see this kind of richness that the Chardonnay might not see. So year to year, when we have a good ripe year, they definitely lend their hand to the Blanc de Noir program. Typically because of the yields of the Pinot Noir or the Pinot Meunier, it's been such a small portion of the Pinot of the Blanc de Noir blend. We use a little bit, usually 5 to 10% in the Brut blend, and then I need it for something for the Rosé, the Célèbre Rosé blend. But certain other years, our Rosé's been a bigger production, leaving me maybe possibly a little bit more yield of Pinot Meunier to do something in other years for a Blanc de Noir or Brut. So this 2016 was an interesting year because in 2014 was a bad winter, if we can remember that back then. 2015, we lacked the vintage. We took off almost. Dr. Frank took the whole vintage off. So I didn't have a 2015 vintage. So 16 produced some challenges as far as production. We had to stick with the Brut program, and we had to make a little bit heavier of a production of Brut than I'm typically producing. So with that, a lot of the Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, or Pinot Meunier all went to a big Brut blend in 2016. The remainder Chardonnay out of the Chateau Vineyard made a Blanc de Blanc blend. And then the remainder of what I had of Pinot Meunier, as well as Pinot Noir from that Chateau blend that didn't make the Brut, luckily was rich enough. It had some dull acidity. I had to add some acid that year. I had 1 gram per liter just to bump it up a little bit on both the Pinot Noir and the Pinot Meunier. In my notes here, we harvested early September, so it is a little bit, it was September 9th and September 10th for the Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier I harvested September 13th of 2016. But that richness that it had lent it, once we were able to sit down and taste it, and like Megan said earlier, with not only the winemaking at Dr. Frank, we have a lot of little hands that play a part, but the family comes into a part, and Barbara, Megan's aunt, Fred's sister, Willie's daughter, is a huge part of the sparkling program. I send her samples all the time. We taste, she comes up here, we taste. So this was kind of, she's more traditional though than maybe even me and Megan kind of are at times. So it definitely lends to the tasting process though, and gets us back to the drawing board over and over and over to see what we have. She wasn't a big fan of going the 100% Pinot Meunier route, where I wanted to try even that year with what we had left, but she did approve of the little bit of Pinot Noir that we added into it to balance it out a little bit. So with these little blends, we've always, me and Megan anyways, have discussed producing 100% Pinot Meuniers just to try them, see where the ageability is, to see what we can do in the future. And this one was kind of going that route, but with a little bit of Pinot Noir to balance it out.
Great, thanks, Eric. We do have a few questions. First one, does Dr. Frank designate specific vineyard plots for sparkling production, or are the grapes selected on a year-to-year basis? And what are the grape qualities you look for your sparkling wine program? Specific range of bricks, physiological ripeness, sugar accumulation, etc.
Yeah, I mean, primarily, like I said, our Blanc de Noir, Blanc de Blanc, Brut program, we look for our Chateau Vineyard. It's on the west side of Cuvee Lake, like Steve was mentioning earlier, a little cooler site. We have a lot more control. Obviously, it's our vineyard. We do purchase some vineyards or some grapes from vineyards, other producers, and that's changed year to year throughout my 15-year career here. And, you know, depending on quality of some other grape growers and production and years, it might fall into the Blanc de Noir, it might fall into the Brut as well, depending on needs and yields. But we definitely look at our own Chateau fruit first. I feel even on a year like this with the drought, our fruit tends to have a lot more fruit concentration that I see from some growers, some other places. It just kind of maybe managed a little bit differently, or the age of the vineyard and maybe even the site specific. But right now, yeah, that's something we're looking for, a little bit more site specific. Single vineyard select production, you know, in the future. Yeah. Looking at some more planning going on, even with Pinot Meunier here in the future, as well as Pinot Noir that we need desperately in the Finger Lakes.
The bricks.
Oh, and the bricks. Yeah, bricks, I typically anywhere, it really depends. I try to go off of pH mostly versus bricks or a TA. And I'll shoot for right even 3, 2.95 to 3, maybe even 3.1. Obviously, I don't have that luxury all the time, from sampling in the vineyard, just a little berry sampling, to when you can actually pick and hand harvest. We do everything hand harvested. So anywhere from 17.5 bricks to maybe even 20 bricks really is where most of the fruit comes in. But I do adjustments, like I said, with this one. I'll adjust that pH. I'll make some additions with the acidity. It's nothing like I was used to out in California, but definitely.
My dad loves to tell the story about how Eric, when he joined us, he had a very sore back, and he was constantly going to the chiropractor because he was lifting huge bags of tartaric acid, and now his back has healed. So that's good.
Yes, we have natural acidity here. It's very nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying just taking the harvest as it comes and adjusting things as needed, as minute as they seem to be year to year.
Yeah. And now one last question before I ask you my last question. Is the aging capability of a Pinot Meunier dominated sparkling wine different than others? I don't know if you've had any experience aging a wine with this much Pinot Meunier in it before to know how it develops differently.
Well, recently I just was given a bottle of an Ontario producer from KEW. He makes 100% Pinot Meunier sparkling wine. It was his 3rd vintage. It was natural, so no dosage, nothing, a natural Brut style. It was a 2017 vintage that I tried, and I thought it really did have an age presence there, and it was a little bit, I mean, there was a freshness there, but it wasn't showing as fresh as even this 16 Blanc de Noir with the 75%. But even my first year here in production in 2005, I was able to just do a few cases of 100% Pinot Meunier sparkling that was left part of that yield that didn't make the Brut or the Blanc de Noir that I bottled up. And like Steve was talking about it in encapsulated yeast, I just threw it together. It wasn't part of my tirage in typically the next year when I bottle these wines. I just did it in the lab with a little bit of encapsulated yeast and tried it. Now, throughout the years, we've tried this wine with different winemakers that have shown up from abroad, and it tends to lean to an age really quick, I feel. So I think the balance there tends to be where the acidity is. And so as
Sure.
long as I keep the acidity high, pH really low, I think we can get to a nice aged Pinot Meunier that can have a little bit of an extended lease.
Great, thank you. Maybe all right. So now it's your turn to tell us your favorite way to enjoy this is Blanc de Noir.
Oh, favorite way to enjoy it.
You want to go first?
Yeah.
Besides in a glass and into your mouth, of course.
Yeah, I think there's tremendous, Kate was talking about food pairing. There's tremendous potential with this wine. Like we actually had it with filet mignon the other few weeks ago, and it stood up to play because it has, the 2 red grapes, it's quite a rich style. I think they're, boxing in traditional method sparkling, really any sparkling into one category only goes with white meat, white fish, is sort of limiting yourself. So it can really stand up to some heavier dishes, I think. And definitely we'll be enjoying it this holiday season for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like Megan said, I think it's very versatile. It's showing some of those deeper red fruits on the end palate. So I think it will really lend its hand, especially with this holiday coming up with a lot of those meat dishes. I mean, I'm a big ham guy. I like the ham with the pineapple cherry dressing, something like that. I think this would go really well with that. A little bit of sweetness on that caramelized ham. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how my family enjoys this wine this holiday. This wine to me represents the Finger Lakes a little bit, only because of the natural acidity that we have there and the ability to transform something almost 4 years later with these nice small integrated bubbles, a nice Prix de Mousse on top, like I've seen from all these other producers here in the Finger Lakes. I mean,
great, thanks guys. All right, so you guys are off to the dual hot seat, so thank you very much. Before we get to Thomas, we have a couple of questions that are more for everybody, so please feel free to chime in on these. The first one, to all panelists, do you see sparkling wine as a growth potential for your business in years to come? And Bruce, I think it indicates that you want to answer this, so feel free to jump in first.
Yeah, I absolutely think that sparkling wine is going to be a step forward in our production. Definitely want to get into traditional process, using a method champignons. So yeah, I'm quite excited to get into that to make a big time sparkler.
Great. Steve or Thomas, anyone else want to jump in?
Sure. In the 80s, when all the champagne houses were moving to California and other places, it was kind of frustrating to us here that they weren't more interested in what we can do in the Finger Lakes, because it seems to me it's the growing conditions are a lot more similar to Champagne than California is. Now, California makes great sparkling wines. I told you a couple that I really like there. And I suppose the infrastructure wasn't here at the time for them to, be able to make 100,000 cases of sparkling wine off the bat. So, but I think that we're in a perfect place to do sparkling, and there's plenty of history and very good examples of it. And I'd like to see it get more attention than it does. And obviously the other products we make here are really nice too. And I love the viticultural diversity that's here anyway. And even Dr. Richard Smart has fond memories of getting his master's degree at Cornell and working with things like Chardonnay and, some of the really successful hybrids from Cornell and other places. But anyway, I think that there's so much potential for sparkling wine here.
Thanks, Steve. And then there's another question for the group. Again, before we get to Thomas, to all panelists, how has COVID affected your growing and harvesting year?
Well, it didn't hurt the vineyards at all. we did change our business model somewhat, and the restaurant was closed for a while. The festivals and jazz concerts that we have were canceled. We do a lot of weddings; those are all postponed. But our direct-to-consumer sales has been was actually better, and quite a bit better. And then the tasting room has picked up again and is doing pretty well too. But it's certainly a disruption.
Anybody else have any comments about COVID specific to harvest and anything that you guys are working on? Otherwise, we can.
Harvest has been very interesting, and managing picking crews and also the crush pad, making sure people are trying to keep as socially distant as possible, etc. There's definitely is a lot of concern, especially down in our area.
Sure.
In Dutchess County, obviously the numbers are climbing, but it has been quite a challenge. I'd also echo that that Steve just mentioned about the tasting room doing fairly well and being able to manage that through this trying time. I'm glad people still came out, and we've done. It's been fun watching the tasting room and the people enjoying coming out there and looking out over the vineyard.
Absolutely. All right, great. Thanks, guys. Last but certainly not least, we have Thomas from Lenz Winery with the only 100% Pinot Noir sparkler of the seminar. Thomas, I know because I've talked to you about this, that you have an affinity for Pacific Northwest Syrah, but when you're not drinking your own sparkling wine, what kind of sparkling wine do you favor?
I drink a lot of local sparkling wines. Cellars has a nice one, Sparkling Points, right around the corner. Pomnock. In our household, my fiance has a rule that we have to always keep a bottle of sparkling in the fridge because she likes to say every day is a good enough reason to celebrate being together.
Absolutely.
I've recently been becoming more obsessed with pet nats. Channing Daughters has some really nice examples. There's like a super aromatic intensity that I get out of some of those.
Cool. All right. Thanks very much. So so why don't you tell us a little bit about Lenz, about this wine, and then I didn't mention this to you earlier in the week, but I also think we should mention the RD wine that isn't available right this second, but you're going to have again soon.
So Lenz, planted in 1978. We're all the way at the east end of Long Island. In 1978, it was the second vineyards planted on Long Island. And I think back then they didn't really know what they were doing, but as everyone, you wanted to plant Pinot Noir because, everyone wants to make that great red Pinot Noir. It's like every winemaker's dream. However, Pinot Noir is really hard to grow on Long Island, really moderated by our maritime climate we have here, surrounded by 3 bodies of water. We get a lot of high humidity, coastal storms in the fall. Sometimes Pinot Noir seems to be the first grape that wants to fall apart. So Eric Fry, my predecessor, really developed a sparkling wine program. So we're able to pick the fruit much earlier before it even has the chance to rot.
And then, so this wine's 100% Pinot Noir. Is it always 100% Pinot Noir, or do you occasionally use some of your Chardonnay in this as well?
It's been adjusted over the years. Like in 2016, when I started taking over the blends in 2016, I added like 10% Chardonnay, but then 17, I decided I didn't like that, so I buffered it back and actually made a 100% Blanc de Blanc, which will be coming out in the future. But yeah, it's I think 03 was the last official release of a wine that had like 40% of Chardonnay.
Okay, cool. And here's another question. Here's a question for you. That's well timed. For decades, Long Island's been promoted as a region with a climate akin to Bordeaux, with Merlot and Cab grown in many vineyards. But now Pinot Noir seems to have gained notoriety in the region. Is Pinot Noir being considered as more suitable for Long Island?
I would not plant it if it was up to.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would. I don't think anyone would.
Rot, for sure.
Yeah, but you are making a red one right now, correct?
I mean, so when we have a good year, we have a good year, and I think it's probably every 1 out of 4. So in 2019, we had like perfect conditions. I decided to leave a little bit of our, only like 8 rows of our Pinot Noir block. I got less than about a ton of fruit out of the what I left. So it's a very small batch, and it came up. We got an extra like 4 weeks almost of hang time on the fruit. Really developed nicely, but it's maybe 1 out of every 4 years we're able to do that. So from a commercial scale standpoint, it doesn't make sense for a consistency of product, which is where the sparkling really is consistent, because we're able to pick it at a much lower ripeness. It never just gets the chance to turn on us.
Right. Another question just came in. When do you normally pick the Pinot for this wine?
So typically it's around Labor Day weekend. The last 2 years was, I believe, September 11th was the official harvest date for the Pinot for the last 2 years at least.
And are you making that picking decision based on pH or bricks or some
I
combination?
A couple things that I've learned with making the sparkling is there's two key points to me. The first one is your harvest decision, going out tasting, walking the vineyards, tasting every day, because you're a really small window of when that fruit is going to be, get the most fruit flavors while maintaining that pH and TA balance. So we harvest typically around 18.5 bricks to 19, looking for a pH under 3.2. TA high 8s is pretty typical. And then the next real important thing when it comes to sparkling is how you handle it in the press. So being as gentle as possible, I make as many press fractions as possible, putting a pH meter into the press and monitoring tasting, because you can really quickly extract too many flavors that you don't want to, that will be exaggerated at the end product with the sparkling. It also allows byproduct. You make a rosé with the heavy press fraction. So after I hit a certain press fraction, roll the press up, go out, get lunch, get a couple beers, come back, press into our rosé program.
Nice. There's a question that came in for actually, here's one for you first. How much Pinot Noir is planted at Lenz, or was planted initially, and has Lenz yanked or replanted any? And if you have replanted, what have you replanted with?
We have not yanked or replanted. We have about 2.5 acres. The spacing is about 9.3. Nine by 3. It's all unilateral cordon, single cordon. Most of it is spur pruned. We've found the balance of that comes out a little bit better than cane pruning. We get about 1 cluster per shoot on average, and about 2 tons per acre is our average.
Right. So this is another question for the whole group, but Thomas, you get to answer it first because you're off mute right now. I'd love to hear from everyone how climate change has affected your vineyards, and has that changed what you've planted or what you're choosing to use? Has it changed how you're farming? Is anyone working on more sustainable methods or organic farming? So there's a few questions packed into one question there.
On organic farming, I think climate change would make it almost harder for us to go more organic. We seem to get more late season weather patterns, which I hope don't go. I hope they go away. I think a little bit of warmer climate might help us until, of course, we go underwater.
Right.
But I also see a potential for growing some more Rhone varietals on the Long Island, which I look forward to expanding.
Anybody else want to chime in on climate change?
As I mentioned, the aspect, I didn't mention that particularly, but which side of the lake the grapes are on. It's the sun angle that has a lot to do with what kind of grapes are going to ripen. And so some of the cooler parts I'm finding are more suitable for Riesling and sparkling wine components, and the warmer parts are better for Syrah and Merlot, perhaps. But the trouble is, if we just think that everything's going to be like Bordeaux in a few years, we still have a lot of disruptive weather. If we wanted 2.5 inches in July of rain, we don't need it all in one afternoon with the drought the rest of the time. So those things are concerning, and they do make it a little bit trickier to, I think, reduce our inputs in the vineyard. But so it's sort of a moving thing, moving target, I think.
Anybody else want to chime in on climate change and varieties?
Yeah.
Bruce?
One of the things I wanted to mention that, climate change also includes events, especially in the winter, when you still get those deep dives in the temperature. So the survival of a lot of the vines, especially where we are, and especially up in the Finger Lakes, if you get some, minus 12-degree temperatures like we did two years ago, where we had 2 or 3 days in a row where it dropped to minus 12, you can have quite a bit of damage in the vineyard. So
Right.
you still have to moderate what, yeah, you may get a longer growing season, but you may not get through the winter with those varieties.
Right. Yeah, that is the important thing to remember, that climate change isn't the same as global warming.
Correct.
All right. There is one other question. That this is another general one for the people doing traditional method. Do you hand riddle? And if so, for how long typically? So Eric, Steve, Thomas.
So at Lenz, we do everything by hand. We don't capability of doing any other way. So everything I do is by hand. We hand riddle. It takes me, I don't know, a week or so to hand riddle. Disgorging everything by hand, bottle by bottle. It makes it so I have a rolling disgorgement. It takes me almost a full year almost to disgorge a full vintage of wine. So they do change from the beginning, because you'll have almost another year of lees contact from the start to the end of a vintage.
So with the invention of the gyro pellet, the gyro pellets, they came up with some riddling aids that help to help the yeast along, so you don't have to do so much jiggling and tapping the bottles in the riddling racks. And we fill our tirage at Glenora, and then we ship it to Pleasant Valley over in Hammondsport, and where it ferments in bins on its sides, on their sides. And then we bring it back after it's close to time to start disgorging, and we shake up the yeast, spin them, put them in boxes, send them back to Pleasant Valley. The truck ride, 45-minute truck ride, helps. And then we bring it back to Glenora. If it's ready, fine. If not, it goes for another truck ride. So we pay some forklift fees for that, but it saves us. Riddling in racks takes up a lot of room. It takes up a lot of time to put them in the racks, but you can really fine tune how it works, and the age of the yeasts makes a difference in how it riddles too. So the thing about automating that is you don't get to fine tune that as well as you get to by hand, but we're not actually riddling in racks by hand.
Eric?
Yeah, so here, when I first started, a lot more was hand riddled. Now, most of my hand riddling racks are mostly for dosage wines and wines to look at the next vintages. But right now is mostly the automatic riddling, the gyro pallet, like Steve said. I currently have 4 of them in use for the demand here. Everything, I got a little semi-automatic disgorger. We do about 360 to 420 bottles an hour. Goes on to an automatic or semi-automatic corker. I guess I put it on the track of the corker, and then it gets the cork in the wire hood. I even have now a new machine for us is a cork orientator that feeds the corker, orientates the right side of the cork and goes to the corker. New labeling. We've kind of put a lot of attention to this back in 2016 when I had my old Dosana disgorging unit kind of starting to leak on me and fail. I would have had to send it back into Champagne at Grelier, which was bought out by TDD Machines, and they would have had to fix it and send it back. So at that time, instead of doing that, we were looking to look for better equipment and to move forward, obviously with bigger productions coming in. So a semi-automatic disgorger at the time was needed, was necessary, and it's definitely keeping up our demand. My riddling program through the gyro pellets is about a 9-day program, but I can do, it's computer generated, so I can add whatever program I want. I mean, it's almost endless what they give you. You can adjust it, you can mimic different programs of where you want to start your degree versus how you want it to turn and how often you want it to turn. So
yeah, if you guys don't mind me asking, how much is one of those machines?
Typically, yeah, I got it used from J Winery, where I used to work. They were downsizing a lot of their stuff when actually just recently when they were bought out by Gallo. I happened to be out there on a vacation and went to visit some friends, and all these machines were sitting in their parking lot. So, I quickly made some calls and we worked something out, but typically new, they can be 10 to 15 grand. Computers anywhere from 3 to 5 grand to run it.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of depends, and then you need the riddling bins, and it depends on your growth from there.
Okay, thanks. All right, so that's it for the questions. Thomas, before I let you go, I need to know what your favorite way to enjoy this cuvee is.
For me, I would have to say one of the benefits of COVID is we've had all these like roadside oyster stands pop up everywhere, and they basically are selling oysters on the side of the road at wholesale prices, and I've really taken advantage of that. Wintertime shellfish is definitely my jam with sparkling wine.
All right. Thanks very much. So you're off the hot seat. Before we wrap up totally, I have one final poll for everybody. If you could just give us, so just let us know what your favorite wine was today. I don't see any other questions coming in. If there are any that they come in after we wrap up, we'll capture those, and we'll make sure that we follow up with you. Again, I just want to thank the New York Wine and Grape Foundation for inviting me to host this. To all of our panelists, thank you so much for giving us your time. We know it's the tail end of harvest, but you're still incredibly busy, so we really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And to all of our attendees, thank you as well. I know we're all busy trying to figure out what our lives are like right now, but we really appreciate it. We hope you learned something today, and hopefully you've fallen for New York sparkling wine the way that we all have. So that's it for me. Jen, is there anything else we need to cover before we wrap up?
Nope, we're all set. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll be sending out a follow-up with a video and a survey. We encourage you to take that, as well as the contact information for all the wineries.
Great. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks for having us.